February 26, 2012 was the day when a chance meeting between two strangers in a quiet suburb of Sanford changed the course of the national debate about race, self-defense laws, and justice. That evening, George Zimmerman shot at 17-year-old African-American Trayvon Martin, mortally wounding him. According to Zimmerman, his actions were motivated by the need for self-defense. Based on his version of events, Zimmerman was detained by the police, but soon released on the basis of a statement of self-defense and in accordance with the Florida state law, Stand Your Ground, which allows the use of deadly force when threatening his own life. However, shortly after the incident, the public reaction drew national attention to the case. The justice movement demanded a review of police actions and the arrest of Zimmerman. The protests and actions that swept through many U.S. cities highlighted deep-rooted racial problems in society and brought to the forefront discussions about how the justice system works fairly, especially towards Black Americans. The city of Sanford, located in north-central Florida, about 30 minutes from Orlando, was a typical suburb with a population of about 53,000 people. The city's economy was based on small businesses, and many of its residents worked in large cities, such as Orlando. Sanford was not known as a place with a high crime rate, but in recent years, residents of the Retreat at Twin Lakes area have increasingly encountered petty crimes, which has generated public anxiety and a desire to strengthen security measures. The Retreat at Twin Lakes complex was a typical gated residential community where residents felt relatively protected due to fences and limited access. However, the increased thefts prompted many of them to participate in surveillance programs, one of which was George Zimmerman. The residential complex was home to people of different social groups, reflecting the economic and ethnic diversity of the city. Sanford was also a city with deep historical racial issues. Its population consisted of approximately equal numbers of whites and African Americans, which at times led to social friction. Issues of inequality and racism were raised more than once in this community, especially among the African American community, who believed that the city police often ignored their rights and did not sufficiently protect their interests. Trayvon Benjamin Martin was born on February 5, 1995 in Miami, Florida, and was an ordinary teenager who grew up in an African American family. He was only 17 years old at the time of his death. Raised by his mother Cybril Fulton and Tracy's father Martin, Trayvon lived mostly with his mother but maintained close relationships with both parents. His father lived in Sanford, a small town in central Florida where the tragedy occurred. Trayvon was a student at Dr. Michael M. Kropp Senior High School in Miami. Like many teenagers his age, he was interested in sports, especially football, and loved video games. According to the memories of friends and family, he was a friendly, open, and inquisitive young man who, despite a number of problems in his studies and life, always tried to establish relationships with others. He was not a member of criminal organizations and was not seen in serious offenses, although, like many teenagers, he had minor disciplinary problems at school. On that day, February 26, 2012, Trayvon was visiting his relative in Sanford. He came for a few days to spend time with his family, as his school had recently been closed for the holidays. Late that evening, he left the house to buy himself something to eat at the local 7-Eleven store. He had only a bottle of Arizona iced tea and a bag of Skittles with him. This would be an important detail, emphasizing his inoffensiveness that night. George Michael Zimmerman, born on October 5, 1983, was a resident of the same Sanford neighborhood where the tragedy occurred. He was 28 years old at the time. Zimmerman lived in the complex, the Retreat at Twin Lakes, a place where many people rented or bought housing. The area was considered relatively safe, but over the past few years there has been an increase in crime, including theft and break-ins, which has caused concern among local residents. Zimmerman, the son of a white father and mother of Peruvian descent, identified himself as Hispanic. He was known as a responsible person in his community and actively participated in the Neighborhood Watch program, which aimed to maintain order in the area. This program was designed to allow residents to report suspicious activity or people in their neighborhood. However, Zimmerman took his role extremely seriously, often personally patrolling the neighborhood in his car. By the time of the incident, Zimmerman had received a concealed carry permit and was always armed, performing his patrols in the neighborhood. His personality caused conflicting opinions among acquaintances. Some considered him respectable and responsible, others noted his tendency to suspicion and excessive insistence on security issues. On the evening of February 26th, when he saw Trayvon Martin, he, according to him, suspected that the teenager might be connected with recent thefts that took place in the area. The late evening of February 26, 2012 turned out to be cold and rainy for Sanford, Florida. Around 7 p.m., Trayvon Martin left his father's house to walk to the nearest 7-Eleven store and buy something to eat. He put on a hoodie to protect himself from the rain and took his phone with him. After making a purchase, a bottle of Arizona iced tea and a bag of Skittles candies, he headed back to the residential complex, the Retreat at Twin Lakes. Meanwhile, George Zimmerman, doing his voluntary patrol duty as a participant in the neighborhood watch program, was sitting in his car. He noticed Martin walking down the street in a hood and immediately became alert. There had been several break-ins and thefts in the area in previous months, and Zimmerman, in his own words, was determined to prevent more crimes.
This guy looks like he's up to no good or he's on drugs or something.
At 7:09 p.m., George Zimmerman called 911 to report a suspicious person in his neighborhood. In the recording of the call, Zimmerman can be heard describing the young man to the dispatcher. Zimmerman: "There's someone walking around here, and he's acting weird. He seems to be just hanging around. Maybe he's on something. He looks like it's not hard for him to break into something." Zimmerman also mentioned that Martin was wearing a hood, which, in his opinion, aggravated suspicion. The 911 dispatcher continued to ask questions, trying to clarify Martin's location and his actions. At one point, Zimmerman mentioned, "Zimmerman, these bastards always slip away." This phrase, uttered with obvious irritation, became one of the key points in the proceedings, as it demonstrated Zimmerman's alleged bias towards a stranger. The 911 dispatcher asked Zimmerman if he was following Martin, to which he replied in the affirmative. The dispatcher recommended, "Dispatcher, we don't want you to do that." However, despite this warning, Zimmerman left his car and began chasing Trayvon on foot. It is not known exactly how much time passed from the moment when Zimmerman began to harass Martin to their first verbal altercation. Testimony about what happened in the next few minutes varies enormously, but it is known that at some point Martin realized that someone was following him and tried to hide.
State star witness. She was supposed to spellbind the jury with details of her phone call with Trayvon Martin just moments before he was killed.
Martin was on the phone with his girlfriend, Rachel Gentile, throughout this time. Rachel later testified in court that Trayvon was worried about being stalked and she advised him to run away. Martin told her, "This guy is following me." The last thing she heard was the sound of a blow and the sounds of a struggle. Witnesses who lived nearby later gave different statements. Some claimed to have heard loud cries for help. Others described the moment of the fight, but the exact sequence of events remains uncertain. One of the key evidences is a recording of a 911 call made by a resident of the area, in which muffled screams and the sound of a gunshot are heard. These screams later became the subject of controversy. The prosecution claimed that they were the screams of Trayvon Martin, while the defense insisted that George Zimmerman shouted. What happened in the last moments of Trayvon Martin's life is the subject of much debate. What is known is that around 7:16 p.m., a single pistol shot occurred, which struck Trayvon in the chest at close range. According to Zimmerman, during a physical confrontation, Martin punched him in the face, knocked him down, and began hitting his head on the ground. Zimmerman claimed that he saw no other option but to shoot to protect his life. A forensic examination later confirmed that the shot was fired at point-blank range. When police arrived at the scene, they found Zimmerman with bleeding wounds to his head and face. and Trayvon Martin lying face down on the ground, dead. During the search, Martin did not find any weapons, only a phone, a Skittles bag, and a bottle of Arizona tea. Zimmerman immediately told police that he fired in self-defense. He was taken to the police station to testify, but after a short interrogation was released because the police considered his actions to be in accordance with the Florida state law, Stand Your Ground, which allows citizens to use deadly force if they believe their lives are at risk. This incident could have remained only a local tragedy, if not for the subsequent events that brought it to the attention of the national media and ignited a deep social and racial debate in American society. When Sanford police arrived at the scene around 7:17 p.m., the situation seemed clear enough. George Zimmerman, with injuries to his face and head, claimed that he was forced to use firearms in self-defense against Trayvon Martin, who, according to him, attacked him. Trayvon was lying on the ground, his body showing no signs of life. All he had in his pockets were a bottle of iced tea and Skittles candies, items he had bought at the store a few minutes before his death. The first thing the police officers did was search Martin's body to find a possible weapon. However, he did not have a knife or a gun, which immediately raised questions about Zimmerman's version of self-defense. However, the officers, taking into account his statements about the attack and the visible signs of a struggle on his body, decided not to detain him on the spot. The gun that was fired was seized for further investigation, but Zimmerman has not been charged. After George Zimmerman was taken to the police station for questioning, he gave full testimony about what happened that night. According to him, while performing his duties as part of the Neighborhood Watch program, he noticed Trayvon Martin, who, in his opinion, behaved suspiciously. Zimmerman claimed that the young man was looking around and moving slowly, as if looking around. This prompted him to call the police. Zimmerman stated that after he got out of his car, he began to follow Martin so as not to lose sight of him until the police arrived. However, soon, according to him, Martin approached him and asked him a question. "Why are you following me?" At that moment, Zimmerman claimed the teenager unexpectedly punched him in the face, which led to the start of a fight. Zimmerman added that once on the ground, he felt Martin begin to bang his head on the sidewalk. Fearing for his life, he took out his pistol and fired.
Mr. Zimmerman has made the statement of self-defense.
Zimmerman's testimony was important for the initial investigation because his version of events met the requirements of the Stand Your Ground law. This Florida law grants citizens the right to use deadly force if they feel their lives are in danger or serious harm to their health. And this was a key argument in favor of not detaining Zimmerman immediately after the incident. After Trayvon Martin's body was taken to the morgue, an autopsy was performed, which confirmed that death occurred from a single shot to the chest. The bullet passed through the heart and caused instant death. Experts also drew attention to the fact that there were no signs of weapons or other objects on Martin's body that could indicate his aggressive actions against Zimmerman. However, small scratches and injuries were found on his hands, which could have been the result of a struggle. As for Zimmerman, his wounds were superficial. He had bruises and small cuts on his face and head. The medical examiners concluded that the injuries could have been the result of a fight, but they were not so serious as to indicate a clear threat to Zimmerman's life. However, his injuries confirmed the presence of a physical confrontation.
Until we can establish probable cause to dispute that, we don't have the grounds to arrest him.
The initial decision by the Sanford police not to arrest George Zimmerman caused a massive outburst of public outrage. For many, it was unclear why the man who shot the unarmed teenager was not immediately detained. The African-American community, as well as representatives of human rights organizations, argued that if Martin had been white, the case would have developed differently. The issue of racial bias was also raised by both Zimmerman and the police. Especially outrage was caused by the information that no traces of weapons were found in Trayvon's body. This detail led many to doubt the veracity of Zimmerman's testimony and led to accusations that the police were not actively investigating the case, turning a blind eye to possible violations. Trayvon Martin's parents, Cybril Fulton and Tracy Martin, immediately launched a campaign for justice for their son. They called for a full investigation and for Zimmerman to be held accountable. Soon after, mass protests began across the country, led by both local activists and well-known national human rights organizations. In March 2012, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, and other public organizations began holding rallies and demonstrations demanding Zimmerman's arrest and a full review of the case. A national campaign for justice soon followed, gathering thousands of participants across the country. The Neighborhood Watch program to which Zimmerman belonged was also heavily criticized. It turned out that the participants of the program were not supposed to carry weapons or chase suspects, but only report suspicious persons to the police. This called into question the actions of Zimmerman, who violated this protocol by following Martin.
To show that we are not having a 2 or 3 day anger fit. This is a social movement for justice.
As protests continued, escalating across the country, during them activists accused the Sanford police of bias and negligence, which forced law enforcement agencies to launch an internal investigation. Questions were also raised about the need to review the Stand Your Ground law, as many saw it as a reason why such incidents could occur without serious consequences for those responsible. In late March, under pressure from the public and politicians, Florida Governor Rick Scott announced the appointment of a special prosecutor, Angela Corey, to handle the case and conduct an independent investigation. This step showed that the local police had not handled the situation properly, and that a new look at the circumstances of the incident was needed. Thus, the first weeks after the tragedy became a turning point, when the case turned from a local tragedy into a national symbol of the struggle for racial justice and reform in the legal system. The Trayvon Martin case immediately took on racial overtones. Many felt that George Zimmerman perceived Martin as a threat because of his race and appearance. Zimmerman's phrase in a conversation with a 911 dispatcher, "These bastards always slip away," caused a resonance, as it was interpreted as bias. The African-American community saw the incident as a reflection of their daily reality, where they are often perceived as potential criminals. Martin's case has become a symbol of the struggle for racial justice. Issues related to the perception of blacks, discrimination, and injustice in the justice system have become the subject of discussion at the national level. The case had a long-term impact on public sentiment and pushed for reforms in the police and justice system. Under pressure from widespread public criticism and protests across the country, Florida Governor Rick Scott appointed Special Prosecutor Angela Corey on March 22, 2012, to review the case and conduct a new investigation. Corey's appointment was seen as an attempt to restore confidence in the justice system, as the Sanford local police and the district attorney's office were sharply criticized for initially refusing to detain George Zimmerman. Angela Corey was known as an experienced and determined prosecutor, and her appointment raised new expectations in society. It seemed to many that now the investigation would be conducted more thoroughly, and the case would have the opportunity to be considered at the court level, rather than closed at the stage of preliminary investigation. In the course of her work, additional investigations were conducted, including the re-examination of witnesses and the analysis of new evidence that could affect the development of the case. On April 11, 2012, Angela Corey announced that George Zimmerman had been charged with second-degree manslaughter. This decision was a turning point in the case, as many expected that the charge would be less serious. For example, negligent homicide. Shortly after the charges were filed, Zimmerman was arrested and taken into custody. The press and the public actively discussed his arrest, and Zimmerman himself had been in an unknown place until that moment, avoiding media attention. In court, Zimmerman pleaded not guilty to the charges, and his lawyers said he acted within the law of self-defense. The Stand Your Ground law and its role in protecting Zimmerman. One of the key features of this case was the legal defense of George Zimmerman based on the Florida Stand Your Ground law. This law, adopted in 2005, states that citizens have the right to use force, including lethal force, if they feel an immediate threat to their life or health. The law does not require a person to retreat or try to avoid conflict if he is in a place where he has the right to be. Zimmerman's defense was based on this law. His lawyers argued that having felt his life threatened during the fight with Trayvon Martin, their client acted lawfully and had every right to defend himself by using a weapon. The application of this law has caused widespread debate both in legal circles and among the public. Critics of the law argued that it could become an excuse for excessive use of force, especially in cases where racially motivated crimes could be disguised as self-defense. During the trial, the defense presented evidence that Zimmerman, following Martin, at some point was under threat of physical attack. According to the defense, Zimmerman was knocked down and then began to receive blows to the head, which allegedly led him to believe that his life was in danger. On June 10, 2013, the trial of George Zimmerman began in Sanford. The process was widely covered in the media and attracted considerable attention both inside and outside the country. The trial began with the selection of a jury, and this process turned out to be difficult, since most of the public already had a clear opinion about the case. 6 jurors were selected, all women, of whom 5 were white and 1 was of Hispanic origin. This caused additional criticism, as many believed that the jury did not reflect the diversity of society and would not be able to objectively consider the case. The trial included numerous witnesses from both the prosecution and the defense. The main issues that had to be resolved in court were as follows: whether Trayvon Martin really attacked Zimmerman and how justified the use of deadly force was. The prosecution tried to prove that Zimmerman provoked the conflict by following Martin and entering into a confrontation with him, and that Martin was defending himself, not attacking. The defense, in turn, argued that Zimmerman was a victim and acted within the law. One of the key points of the trial was the testimony of Rachel Gentel, Trayvon Martin's girlfriend, who was talking to him on the phone at the time of the collision. Gentel claimed that she heard Martin say that someone was following him and that he was trying to avoid contact with Zimmerman. She also heard the sound of a fight and Trayvon's screams moments before the connection was cut. In addition, experts presented a recording of a 911 call in which screams for help and the sound of a gunshot are heard. One of the key points of the case was to establish who exactly was screaming for help, Martin or Zimmerman. Both camps claimed that it was their side that was the victim, but it turned out to be impossible to accurately determine the affiliation of the voice, since the examinations did not give an unambiguous answer. The defense also presented evidence that Zimmerman had injuries to his head and face that could have been sustained during the fight. These injuries, according to Zimmerman's lawyers, confirmed his version that he was attacked and had no choice but to shoot. The prosecution based its case on the fact that George Zimmerman deliberately provoked a conflict by pursuing Trayvon Martin, despite police instructions not to do so. Prosecutors argued that Zimmerman had been careless and biased in suggesting that Martin was a criminal based on his appearance. They stressed that Trayvon was not armed and posed no real threat to Zimmerman. Prosecutors also focused on the fact that Martin was just a teenager who was returning home after buying snacks. They argued that Zimmerman, by pursuing him, created a situation that eventually led to tragedy, and that in this situation, self-defense was unjustified. The defense insisted that their client acted in strict accordance with the law, and that it was Martin who first launched the physical attack. They argued that Zimmerman, having been knocked down and subjected to blows, had every reason to fear for his life. Zimmerman's lawyers emphasized his injuries and referred to the Stand Your Ground law, which gives the right to defend himself in any available way in the event of a threat.
George Zimmerman found not guilty in the murder of Trayvon Martin, and this tweet moments ago.
The verdict in the George Zimmerman case, acquittal on all counts, caused a storm of indignation among a significant part of American society. On July 13, 2013, when the jury delivered its verdict, thousands of people across the country took to the streets expressing their disappointment and outrage. For many, this verdict has become a symbol of the injustice deeply ingrained in the American justice system, especially when it comes to cases involving African Americans.
With the fact that this guy has not been arrested who murdered my son. So that is very difficult for me as a mother.
Trayvon Martin's parents, Cybril Fulton and Tracy Martin, have publicly expressed their sorrow and bewilderment at the verdict. They stated that, despite the court's decision, they would continue to fight for justice in memory of their son. "My heart is broken, but faith in God and the strength that our community gives me help me hold on," Trayvon's mother said in an interview after the verdict. The father also noted that, despite the court decision, the Trayvon case has become a symbol for millions of people who have faced similar injustice. Many African Americans and human rights organizations took the verdict as further proof that the lives of Black people in the United States are underestimated. They pointed to the fact that an unarmed Black teenager had been killed and the man who shot him had been acquitted. This view was widely supported by various activist groups who called for reform of the justice system and law enforcement agencies. The death of Trayvon Martin and the acquittal of George Zimmerman became a catalyst for large-scale social change. This case has exacerbated the problem of racial inequality in the United States and has drawn attention to bias in justice. It also gave impetus to the Black Lives Matter movement, which continues to fight for the rights of African Americans and law enforcement reform. After the incident, police reforms began, including the introduction of body cameras for police officers and anti-bias programs. These changes were aimed at increasing the transparency and responsibility of law enforcement agencies, as well as preventing cases of excessive use of force. Discussions on the right to self-defense. The Stand Your Ground law, which played a key role in Zimmerman's acquittal, has been the subject of fierce debate. Many advocated for its revision, arguing that the law provides too wide an opportunity for the use of deadly force, especially based on racial stereotypes. Trayvon Martin's name has become a symbol of the struggle for justice and equality. His death had a huge impact on public sentiment and helped draw attention to systemic problems of racial discrimination. The foundation, founded by his parents, continues to work to inform society about the problems of violence and bias. Thus, the death of Trayvon Martin changed American society, sparking a wave of protests, movements, and reforms that continue to influence politics and social structures in the country.